All right. So it's probably Wednesday by the time you guys are seeing this, I would think, anyway. Is this working? Yes. As is typical, right? So going through, looking at some of the Packback questions that you guys have posted to see what's going on with that. And so these are just like a couple questions that I saw, and not to say that these are again not like not that anyone's is bad, but these are just ones that immediately caught my eye. So this first question comes from Kayla Diaz, and who's asking in what ways can the system prevent police brutality with the amount of power they claim? And so a lot of policing questions are coming up this semester for obvious reasons. We've had police are always in the news. 2020 is certainly a big year for police brutality and protests and things like that, and really engaging and asking a lot of questions that we probably have not asked before. And so it makes the topic incredibly important. And so with this then, what ways do we have that do exist, right? Because right now it seems like there's not really anything that works. So if we think about this for a second, right, we do have issues where when they get protected, they often have to be ratted out. Someone has to, say, hey, you committed this crime, you have to report it to police. And if that doesn't happen, right, there's not really kind of outlet. There's really a big insular, police blue solidarity kind of question that limits and inhibits, prevention. If there's prevention of police brutality, right, so we want to keep it from happening. There are ways where people have been targeted for lawsuits, but that usually only targets the police department because they have money. So the individual officer is never, at risk for doing anything or receiving any kind of punishment. Maybe if there was a threat of a citizen, board that was going to oversight it, but that doesn't really prevent, it just investigates and holds people accountable. And so the clearest way to prevent it is to improve decision-making of officers in order to not use brutality and to, separate people who do that. Because it goes more than, why don't, you could limit police powers and limit some police brutality. That's certainly an effort that's being made at the state level in California to limit the use of force. But otherwise, it's kind of hard, right? I mean, most people most of the time don't commit this kind of acts, but when a police officer screws up, right, someone's life ends. Or they're severely beaten, right? If they face no repercussions, there's really no point in doing it, right? So, they are the most visible in society, and how do we correct it, right? It's really a big challenge in order to get it to 100%. Because the thing is, as long as there's even a little bit, people aren't going to be satisfied, and rightfully so, right? Because, lives are important. All Black Lives Matter, Latinx, Hispanic X, all that matters, right? So, in that case, then, prevention is more about treatment and education about the consequences and setting in safeguards, as well as maybe holding officers more accountable than they probably are now in terms of civil court or criminal court or something like that. Because a lot of times police agencies will say, I was at the time, based on my training, this is the way I evaluated things. And at that point, once you're evaluated based off of your training, and not a casual person, right? A jury isn't going to be well, I'm a police officer, I know what happened. If anything, if you're a police officer at a jury, they would throw you out. So to the extent that happens, then it's really more, the easiest way is either going to completely limit contacts with people, except for the most extreme situations. Maybe and teach people how to de-escalate situations and use different ways of mediating a system rather than using weapons. And, probably retraining on or limiting, on what situations one can and can use force, right? So those are probably the clearest examples of that. Then for a little second question, this is from Raul Orvar Sanchez. Should women get jail time for falsely accusing someone of sexual assault or even rape? So a couple things here. So let's just make it so, should anyone get jail time, right? Because sexual assault can have, can happen to anyone, and anyone can accuse. And, we shouldn't just focus just on women, right? We'll be more inclusive. Second, sexual assault and rape are the same thing. At least defined. There are different forms of it, certainly, but they're the same thing. So I guess what this question is really coming down to is, If we spot, this topic is really like a hot button issue because people focus on, it creates like this, like sort of like rape myth, right? Where people are simply accusing that's not, arrested. We should really broaden it to more other crimes, right? Instead of just sexual assault or sexual, people making those accusations. All crimes, right? What happens if we falsely accuse anyone of committing any crime, right? Regardless of how serious it is. So if I falsely accuse someone murdered or had insider stock trading or, was a drug dealer or something like that, what should happen to those people, right? What do we do to people who are reporting crimes, which is already notoriously difficult, especially on sensitive subjects, who later found out they should get falsely accused, right? A lot of it will depend on how much damage, maybe that we factor in how much damage was done to someone's reputation or career. Do we factor in, how egregious the accusations were? Do we factor in time? Do we factor in the circumstances, the situations of that, right? And then it also leads to a different question, like if there is this belief then that people are going to be rigorously, interrogated about, an accusation, which in many cases they are anyway, which can limit, someone's willingness to report, how far do we go, right? And so then it becomes like, vetting the accuser rather than, investigating the criminal, right? And that leads to this interesting balance, right? We shouldn't, allow falsely accused crimes to occur or to be reported, right? But we also can't, become so militant about investigating people that we limit people from, reporting crimes in the first place because they're like, what's the point, right? Because you're not going to believe me anyway if I do, right? So there's this interesting, balance point. So it's this nuanced topic that, I think everyone would agree that being falsely accused of any crime is wrong, and depending on how severe, knowingly doing it, and that's a separate issue, right? And knowing it and intending to do harm of some kind is also a different issue. But how deep do we want to go down this, right? Like, so what are the consequences for that? What should they be, right? And I think that's something that's open to a lot of discussion is what would that look like, and how far do we go? And is there going to be a net positive if we do that, right? Especially if it limits stuff, right? Like you can imagine, like every time you maybe you call the police and you see something going on, right? I don't know, the drug dealing, and it happened, and someone's like, "Let me check your story here, bub. You say a fire's happening. How do I know that's true, right? Like, it depends on the situations, right? And if we reframe it that way, does it matter? Does it change? So it's not something that I can really answer, but I think it's something that's really important for all of you to explore is under what circumstances and to what extent do we investigate people who falsely accuse others of crimes, and what factors should or should we not include. So with that, we'll end this video and hope to see your guys' responses this week. So I'll talk to you then.